A devastated Rome welcomed the returning refugees, and the graveyard silence of its long streets and wide forums were once again filled with the voices of the people. The crushed and crushing system of the empire no longer worked. The bread supply ceased. The orders for the provinces were not carried out. The senators no longer owned innumerable latifundia throughout Europe. There was no more gold, no more legions, no more active population. Anything that tried to continue to exist under imperial orders was confronted with the need to comply with the rigid restrictions, laws, and requirements that the Roman bureaucracy had developed over several centuries, and inevitably collapsed, unable to bear the tax and legal oppression without the powerful external support that the outlying provinces had once organized for the country. The emperor was assassinated, but no one dared to run for office, obviously aware of the unimaginable weight of the obligations received with the title, which, if unfulfilled, threatened swift carnage. The plundered churches were busy restoring their outward glory and grandeur as quickly as possible. The empress and her daughters were held captive in Africa, which, coupled with the death of Pulcheria, meant that the dynasty of Theodosius no longer ruled anywhere in the Roman Empire. In the east remained the husband of Pulcheria, old man Marcian, and the power under it was taken to the hands of the barbarian commander Arrian Flavius Ardiver Aspar and his 3 sons. Aspar and his son Flavius Ardiver Jr. occupied the most important military posts of Byzantium, thus having broken wise tradition not to give out the highest military ranks to one family. Marcian was busy. He repelled barbarian invasions from Arabia, continued the sluggish conflict with Persia, and fought a rebellion in the Caucasus. In addition, the emperor in the east was much more involved in ecclesiastical disputes and intrigues. His ability to intervene in the affairs of the western part of the empire was limited. In Illyria, it is modern Croatia, on border of the western and eastern part of empire already some years ruled one of generals of Aetius, Marcellinus, so did not recognize after murder Valentinian as Emperor Maximus. Marcellinus, as one of the famous generals of Aetius, was subject not only to the legions of Illyricum, but also part of the Roman fleet, whose base on the Adriatic Sea was just in the city, which he chose as the place of his rule, Salona. In addition, he had at his disposal mercenaries from the barbarians and the patronage of his neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire, for the last 50 years, already slowly squeezed from the western part of Pannonia, recognized for him a special title, Military Commandant of Dalmatia. In Africa, the evil brigand Haizeric reigned. Possessor of the largest fleet in the west, the Vandals successfully terrorized Italy and brought the islands of the western Mediterranean Sea completely into submission. After the triumphant sacking of Rome, the Vandals continued their annual pirate raids, ravaging different Italian regions one after another. Spain lost its connection with the empire. All major cities and regions were taxed by the Sveva, who under the leadership of King Rahiar made robbery raids on the lands dependent on them. The situation in Gaul looked most calm, the strongest and most populous of the barbarian kingdoms. The Visigothic kingdom adhered in those years loyal to the empire policy. The previous king of the Visigoths, Torsimund, had been murdered by his brothers, and Theodoric II and his brother Frederick, who became commander-in-chief of the army, now ruled. The brothers pursued a pro-imperial policy, recognized themselves as federates of the empire, but returned nothing of what Torsimund had managed to take for his kingdom. Aetius, who arrived in Gaul from Rome, was going to hire Visigoths in the army, which would provide Emperor Maximus with a leverage on the country, but he had no time to finish his business, as tragic news came from Rome. As time passed, no news of new emperors came from Rome. There were no more reckless daredevils who were ready to put on the tiara and purple and go on to feed the fish in the sewers. There were no more men in Italy who could say with certainty that they were loved by the Senate and the people, respected by the army, and supported by Constantinople. Under these circumstances, the vacant throne decided to be occupied by Aetius himself. It was already an elderly man, but he enjoyed great authority among the Visigoths, because for a long time was a confidant of Aetius at the children of Theodoric. Actually, he brought up the king of the Visigoths and his brothers, taught them Roman manners, and after discussing the situation could safely rely on the large barbarian army, which dominated the entire West. An old associate of Aetius, the politician knew well his generals, who now commanded legions in different parts of the country, and expected to come to terms with each individually. Next to Aetius was a host of warriors from Gaul who had proven themselves under Aetius. Behind him were thousands of Goths and young kings loyal to him. The newly proclaimed emperor put the chief of Gaul, former associate of Aetius, General Aetius, and then stopped in Arles and began from there to dispose of the empire assigned to him. In July came the news that the Senate of Rome, for lack of other candidates, recognizes the rule of Aetius. However, the emperor wisely preferred to rule from Arles for a while. The general in Italy, he appointed Ricimer, who was there. Ricimer could not boast of Roman descent, so he did not claim the imperial throne. The child of the union of Svevskogo and Visigothic kings, he from childhood was held hostage under Aetius, and with him gradually grew to an authoritative commander. Having received Italy at his disposal, as well as rich taxes that were collected for the defense of the country, Ricimer began to recruit mercenaries and build a fleet. As a result of his vigorous activity, pirate groups of Vandals were first defeated on land, and after a while, to the indescribable joy of Rome, and at sea. Italy's position improved a little. Once upon a time, the Romans had maintained the loyalty of the barbarians by fear. Then they began to buy loyalty with money and titles. Aetius, having nothing, began to buy the loyalty of the Visigoths with the land of the empire. At his request, the Visigoths traveled to Spain and began to drive out the outlawing Suevians. It was clear to everyone that in doing so, control over tax collection in Spain was simply transferred from the formerly independent Suevians to the formerly dependent Visigoths. But land acquisition loves ritual, and for a simple invitation to sort out problems in the area, Theodoric II saw formal recognition of the rights of the Visigothic kingdom. Having fully secured his loyalty in the rear, Aetius set off for Italy and arrived in triumph in Rome, where he immediately caused himself a lot of problems. Arrived with the emperor court from Arles, began to occupy the original Roman seats at the palace, which showed the complete detachment of the new emperor from local life. However, the opinion of disgruntled local senators, calmly endured the plundering by the Vandals, did not really care about the new emperor. The problem was, rather, that his eastern colleague Marcellinus did not agree to recognize him. The emperor got bogged down in negotiations with the east and missed the moment, which Ricimer took advantage of. The barbarian, fearing for his future, still independently paying for the services of mercenaries and having his own army in Italy, found for himself the ideal candidate for the throne of the empire, the disgraced best general Aetius, Majorian. The one, once undeservedly retired, was even considered as a candidate for emperor, but after the election of Petronius, Maximus was in a suspended state. He was beckoned by the imperial crown and stirred up ambition, after which he arrived in Rome, where again he was no one needed. The offer of the throne from Ricimer was quite satisfactory to the famous warrior, and Ricimer revolted. The credibility of several victories over pirates, a worthy candidate for the throne, as well as the absence of Aetius next to his main army, the Goths were engaged in Spain, decided the outcome of the case. It was only a few months since the return to Rome Aetius, and he was so alien to the city that to pay money to his army was forced to melt down bronze statues. In the capital itself, the emperor had neither sufficient forces, nor money, nor the support of the population. During the defeat of another gang of barbarians who had entered Italy to plunder, the army proclaimed Majorian as emperor. Ricimer supported the rebellion and marched on the capital. As Ricimer approached, Aetius was forced to flee to the friendly north. Ricimer and Majorian moved after him, destroying the administration Aetius had imposed. Finally linking up with one of the approaching units, Aetius courageously decided to counterattack. But in a skirmish in the town of Placentia in northern Italy, facing the main forces of the rebels, he lost almost all of his forces. Locked in the city, the old man took refuge in a church and accepted monasticism there. The rigid Ricimer was satisfied with this, leaving the former emperor alive but leaving assassins who waited day and night for Avitus to come out of the church, which eventually he, driven by hunger, did, after almost 6 months of sitting in the church. It is a sad death when you throw yourself on the merciless knives. After himself, Avitus managed to leave a host of appointees in Gaul who were quite unhappy with Ricimer's coup. Whether the new emperor Majorian was successful, we shall learn in the next installment.